So Bob emails, what do you say?
Yeah.
Anonymous patron, she says, "Hello, Kirk and Bob. The way that you both share insights into the process of healing and relational therapy has helped me so much." So just chiming in. So the way you both share insights into the process of healing and relational therapy has been helpful to me.
That's cool.
Both Kirk's experience from years of doing this work and especially Bob's insights into his personal therapy have helped me to understand that my own experience is not that unusual. You reassured me that feelings I find too shameful to speak about are actually normal or even healthy. And this allowed me to raise my feelings with my therapist with less fear that she would react badly. Recently, I feel a real shift within me, and I wanted to thank you for that.
That's lovely. Thank you.
So just chiming in here, Bob, what do you think?
Thank you for writing in and telling us. That's really lovely to hear. Thanks.
Going on with email. One of my issues in therapy has always been struggling with trust and struggling to believe that my therapist really cares about me.
Yeah.
In my worst moments, I thought she actively wanted to harm me.
Wow.
It
Ouch.
was extremely distressing and frustrating. Recently, this has improved hugely, and I feel like I can feel that my therapist cares about me and supports me even when I'm not with her. So just chiming in. In her longer email, she was talking about how she would, in session, achieve trust, but then a few days after the session, she would return to, my therapist doesn't really care about me, and then a few days later, my therapist might be actively trying to get me.
Yeah.
And of course, this has to do with schemas developed in a situation in which you had an attachment figure that was actually, at the very least, giving you a very reasonable impression that not only is your attachment figure not there for you, caring about you, but actually is actively working against you. So that creates this dichotomy within the self of, I am in desperate need for attachment security because I've never gotten it, but the closer I get to someone, the more terrified I am.
Yeah.
And the typical background is severe abuse. It's not just like a general feeling of neglect from a parent. It's actual physical, sexual harm that is occurring from the main attachment figure.
The person I need is also dangerous.
Yeah. So going on, it feels so powerful and unbelievably good to carry that feeling with me that my therapist is a safe person that cares about me. I'm not sure that I would have stuck with it and gotten to this point without hearing again and again from you that healing takes place in safe relationships. So thank you so much for this. Bob, what do you think about that?
Thanks for telling us. It's lovely to hear. What I think is you're internalizing a good object, which is just a way of saying you feel safe in your attachment to your therapist, and the therapist that lives inside you. You're viewing them as safe. That's lovely. That's a fundamental shift. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really big deal. Hard to achieve, but
agreed.
Worth striving for. So I have a question about touch and therapy. I do therapy via video call, and my therapist lives several hours from me. However, I have met with her in person for therapy a couple of times. Before I go further, I should say that my therapist has firm boundaries about finishing on time and about out-of-session contact. She is understanding of how boundaries can feel cold, but she keeps these boundaries firm even if I am upset or I try to challenge them. We discuss boundaries, and she's always saying that they are there, the boundaries are there to keep me safe. We are both female, by the way, and I think she's about 20 years older than me. So any thoughts on that, Bob? This is the caveat before going into the question here.
It sounds ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. For people with disorganized attachment or a personality disorder of, a schema of this sort, it is often very important that therapists provide a very firm but loving set of boundaries, because when boundaries are loose, then the client might be confused and or will be hurt when you finally do draw the boundary. If you are opening of a boundary that says, yeah, go ahead and text me whenever.
Right.
And, say for a few months, it's a text every 3 weeks or something, and it's pretty brief. Well, the client goes through a crisis and they get attached to you and they start texting you throughout the day. Like maybe it's not immediate, but over time. And it's 25 texts in a day. And your style of therapy or of your life professionally and personally is not to be constantly on call regarding that.
Right.
And at some point you have to draw a boundary. Well, that's going to hurt them.
Yeah.
That's going to feel very abandoning, and they are inevitably going to think that you're either not really caring about them or that they screwed up somehow.
Right.
And so it might destroy the therapy or provide a major thorn in the side of the progress of therapy moving forward. So it's important from the beginning, from the get-go, particularly if the therapist detects a client that might have issues like this, is to have very firm but loving boundaries. You might even say, look, you can text me for these circumstances, or you can text me once a day as long as it's with this thing. It's not like you have to say no texting. It just has to be consistent.
Right.
And you as a therapist have to say, so in all contexts, with every client, by the way, am I okay with this? That's always the question to ask. Like if a therapist were to say, you know what, maybe it'd be a good idea with this client if I open up the possibility of texting me throughout the day. So the question should be, am I okay with that in perpetuity with this client? Because if I work with this client for the rest of my life, is that okay with me?
Yeah.
And two, am I okay with every client? Because it's harmful to potentially give special treatment to one client. If word gets out, other clients will be like, well, I know that you're doing that. How come you're not doing it with me? Am I a bad person? It's a little bit of a less of a problem because there are justifications for some measures. When I was treating people with eating disorders, I had a lot more contact with those folks.
Yeah.
So you can make justification, but if it's not really clear as to what the justification is, then you can harm other clients. You can also give the wrong impression to the client that they're a special person and that they're more than a client, which can be hurtful to a client as well. So you just have to ask yourself, am I okay with this forever? Because if you're not, then don't do it. Also, am I okay with my client exploiting the nature of this boundary that I'm setting? Because a lot of therapists say, I'll open up the possibility of them texting me whenever they want, because, what client is going to text me throughout the day? Well, it's not common, but it can occur. So it's just a question that you just have to ask yourself.
A lot of therapists have a hard time with this sort of thing because they feel like they're being mean. They got in the field because they wanted to be helpful to people, and they feel like having a boundary is like saying no, and that's kind of a mean thing to do, and so they can get loose. So it's really something we all need to be mindful of and considerate of, and as best we can, clear with ourselves about what our real limit is, because ain't nobody sprinting through life. It's all a marathon. So if it's not going to work in 10 years, you probably should be very careful about what you do now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And, I appreciate the concern or effort to quickly be helpful to a client.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to sustain that help over time.
Yeah. Sounds like this therapist is really good at it.
Right. This therapist has really great boundaries, and sounds like there's been a lot of conversations about it.
Yeah.
Sounds like this client, anonymous patron, has really pushed those boundaries and said, hey, at least requested, if not been upset about boundaries being established, and they've had long, helpful, reparative conversations about that.
That's probably a significant part of what's been helpful in therapy. Yeah. So,
right.
Done.
So, going on, I do therapy via, I went back. So, just a reminder, she's saying, we're both female and she's about 20 years older than me.
Right.
Okay. At a previous in-person session, we had hugged. We discussed it beforehand, and it felt good and safe to me when we hugged. This time, this second session in person, I asked if she would also sit next to me for some of the time and if I could hold her hand. So, Bob, if a client asked you to do that, what would you say? You're hemming and hawing.
Yeah, I'm hemming and hawing. I'm thinking about it. What would I say? I would probably say yes. I would be, well, I'm a man, so cisgender straight man. So I'd be, if I'm working with a woman and they're say cisgender and straight, then I'm going to be mindful of what is the implication here, and I would probably ask about what's needed or wanted. I should say this, I would be careful and cautious. I'm not opposed to it off just like period. But there's reason to be really mindful about that, and it has to be okay to say no. Even if the reason for the no is it doesn't work for me.
So if a 35-year-old female client were to ask you this, what would be your tendency?
Well, my tendency is to feel like I should say yes because it's been asked. And I am not as good at boundaries as like I think this therapist is. And something like this did happen to me once, and I had to go back on it. Like I had to say, yeah, that actually, that's not okay with me. That doesn't work for me. And I think it was it was unnecessary to, it would have been better to have avoided it from the start, to just said no from the start and just been firm. And guilt and, my own kind of whatever got in the way of me just being plain and clear.
So you had an impulse to say no, but you overrode that impulse because you were worried about displeasing them.
Yeah, but that isn't necessarily, that's not because I believe that it was therapeutic. I think I was just stuck in my own stuff.
Yeah. And to be specific, they requested it.
Yeah.
Like holding hands or what?
I think they wanted me to, if I remember right, they wanted me to sit next to them. And I think it was hold hands, yeah.
And not a super uncommon request.
No.
But not very common.
No. And nothing wrong with someone asking.
No. Yeah, totally fine.
Yeah.
And great. And you agreed to it and then did it, or agreed to it, then rescinded?
No, I agreed to it and did it. And then I think at the next meeting.
What was it like to do it?
It made me uncomfortable. Like I was like, is this really okay? Is there am I sending a message that I don't want to send? Is the client making a meaning of this that, will be confusing or difficult in the future? Am I making it muddy? And I think I did make it muddy.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you talk about it beforehand regarding like what would happen and what it meant and how long it would happen?
I think so, but to be honest with you, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Right. And did you consult about it at all?
No, I don't think I did.
Seems like you would have.
It seemed like I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you had consulted, what would have been the result prior to doing it or agreeing to it? What do you think you would have come up with?
To turn it down. Because of? Just to keep things clear. Not because there's anything. The fear is that, my client will make some meaning of it that, is, reinforces the schema.
Yeah. Of exploitation or danger?
Of that having a boundary is akin to rejection. And so I'm accepted if you say yes to my request, then I am accepted and acceptable. Whereas if you say no to my request, then that means you're rejecting me.
Yeah, one of the things to think about in these situations, and it's not always the case, is that if you grew up with an attachment figure that exploited you and your boundaries, especially if it's sexually, right? Mm. You had a parent who would coerce you and cross boundaries physically. And it was a semi-safe place for the child, right? Because sometimes you'll have maybe a single parent, or at least a very challenged attachment matrix, if you will. And the few moments of attachment occur during the act of exploitation and harm.
Right.
So you're getting abused, but you're also getting some nourishment, some needs met.
Yeah.
And it will create a schema of that's what love is to exploit and cross boundaries. And it can be very confusing to victims.
Very.
They don't always grow up with the schema and or act on them, but many will. And as they will feel the safety or the urge to attach and to love, it will be associated with at least somewhat of a dose, if not a strong dose, of exploitation and crossing boundaries. They believe, as you were saying, that if I can cross this boundary, if I can push someone beyond their comfort zone, then that proves to me that they are truly with me. Because if they say no to me, then that means, black or white's way of looking at it means they don't really care enough about me.
Right.
Also, I don't want to have to wait 6 months or 6 years to have the regular process of attachment and security and trust. I want to fast track this. And a good way to fast track it is to put someone to the test, right? So I think that can be another thing. I don't know if this patron was doing that, of course. There's no way to know, but it's just another thing to think about. Because one of the ways of evaluating and assessing what the enactment or recreation might be for the client is to evaluate for yourself as a therapist, how does this feel? As long as you aren't bogged down on a lot of your own weirdness, if you're open and fairly healed around this topic, is to think, how do I feel? So when I have had clients that have asked me similar things, one of the things that I will consult about and think about is, does this feel icky or not?
Yeah.
Because it might not look icky, but it'll feel icky to me.
Yeah.
And if it feels icky, then it might be an indication of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean I don't do it, because it could still be a corrective experience. If I were to hold the hand of a client and it felt icky, as long as I made sure it didn't become icky, then it could become a corrective experience for them, such that they walk away having recreated something that part of them was worried it would head down that road, but it didn't. You know what I mean?
It might, like their exploitation was not reenacted.
Right. Or at some point I will know I will have to draw a boundary somewhere, because if it's icky now, they might continue to try to impose and coerce and invade. So I'll let this boundary be crossed to some extent, but I'll make a note that there's a chance that they'll keep pushing. And so maybe even at the outset, I'll say, okay, here's what we'll do, but I won't go beyond this point, so that when it does come up, it's like it had already been disclosed.
And this is not, like, clients are not bad for having these urges or impulses or wants.
No.
It's on the therapist to be mindful and careful.
Yeah. The vast majority of people who want this are people with disorganized attachment who have never had closeness. Yeah. And for people without this kind of trauma, you can get enough of your needs met through talk therapy that will fulfill an individual. But for someone who has literally never had a single human being, including their parents, who they felt secure and safe and loving around, to have that physical contact is human.
Yeah.
It's weird to think about a relationship that is as close as a therapist-client relationship in this kind of reparative work to not touch at all.
You're right.
Because it'd be like having a 1-year-old child and refusing to touch them.
Yeah. It's bad for a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, is there a ton of touching going on? No. But there are well understood ethical guidelines and standards of practice around how to have touch of this nature. Sitting next to someone and holding their hand is a very common touch in therapy, or having your hand on, the therapist puts the hand on the client's back as they cry or something, and you're sitting next to them. There's a set of things. Hugging briefly at the end of session is a normal thing to do. Shaking hands. I like to put my hand on people's back as they're walking out of the office. If I have the urge, I don't always, but sometimes it just feels, I don't know, it just feels like the right thing to do. And only through that hand on the back briefly can I communicate what I'm trying to communicate. And it communicates a lot, I think. So with hugging, with holding hands and sitting next to each other, that, I'm trying to think of what else you could do. I mean, when it comes to kids, there's a whole other topic of touch and therapy, because with kids, I would say 98% of them, there was touch involved, not initiated by me, but by the kid. Because, you got a 7-year-old kid and you're playing, you're throwing the ball back and forth in session or something, and things get a little rambunctious and fun. And he's jumping off of a chair and I'm like, that was great, you know, and then he wants to crash into me or something. Then that's technically touch and therapy.
Really sweet, actually.
Or I just want to razz a teenager and sort of playfully punch them in the shoulder, or be like, "Oh, you big galoot," or something. It's very normal in that circumstance. Is there a lot of holding of hands and hugging? No, but there can be. If the client asks for it, especially.
I remember this cute 7-year-old boy at the hospital where I used to work. He was my friend was sitting in an office chair, a rolling chair, just sitting there doing whatever it is that they were doing. The kid came up and sort of just stood between his legs and kind of leaned back on his knee and just was kind of there looking down and talking and whatever. And it was just a very sweet interaction.
I can't tell you the amount of times that happened to me. Young children would be either processing something or recovering from something, and they would get ever closer to me. And then they would just want to, because, if you've been around kids, they have normal urges that have not been beaten down by society. And they, at times, in a normal way, like every other primate, by the way, they want some physical contact. It's reassuring, it's soothing, it's normal. To the internet, they'd be like, disgusting, boundary violation, call the touch police. And it's like, have you been around children?
4-year-olds behave like 4-year-olds.
And pedophilia, or being attracted to children, is a rare fucking condition that I do not have. Big surprise, because most people don't. So, like, let it go. And the mom was totally she probably wanted that to happen. The mom probably wanted the daughter to bond with me. It was a warm experience. I had one eye on the client and one eye on the kid client. And I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? And I'm thinking, well, this feels good. It feels reparative. It feels appropriate. And I thought, can I, this is all going on in my head because I hadn't planned on this happening, of course. And I'm thinking, can I justify this? Can I document it and have it not be something that I'm afraid of scrutiny?
That's a good litmus test.
And I said, I can justify this completely. I don't know how people would receive it if they heard about it, but fuck them, because everything's fine.
Opinions are like assholes. Everybody got one, right?
So getting back to anonymous patrons' email, again, mostly online therapy, but occasional in person. And they did one where they hugged, and they had planned about it beforehand. It's like, sounds like maybe the client said, hey, when we meet up, can you hug me? And this client has what looks to be a version of disorganized attachment, that real severe need that therapy can provide of stable, secure, safe attachment. And so the hug was very helpful. And then the next session, she's like, would it be okay if you sat next to me and held my hand? I asked if she sat next to me. She agreed, and we discussed how that would work. So when I met her last time, we hugged, and she sat next to me for some of the time, and I held her hand a couple of times. Mm-hmm. The whole experience, including the touch, was incredible.
Oh.
I felt so deeply cared for and totally accepted. Bob,
That's lovely.
what do you think of that?
That's just lovely. That's what we want to have happen.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased.
Yeah, I've heard this a lot from my own clients and otherwise, that it can really provide an experience that talking can maybe never provide or would take years to provide. Mm-hmm. That if you do it right with boundaries and with love, then holding someone's hand occasionally in therapy, sitting next to them, it's neurological. You're taking a training on neurological aspects of attachments and therapy and couples, right? And I'm guessing you've already been over some of the literature and research and evidence about the need that we have as humans,
sort of made that way.
And how, because we're in the Western world, we're so intellectualized and we think of everything as like concepts and philosophy, but we're squishy physical animals with squishy physical neurons that are regulated in part by touch and by attachment.
Right.
The actual neurochemicals, the connections, the amount of firing of the amygdala, and our sleep and our diet and our emotional regulation, our resilience, our mood, are all affected greatly by attachment security, and partially as a subcategory of that, touch. Me and my wife, we don't love each other exclusively through talking.
Yeah.
So we have of course we have that need, and to have a client that has never had that.
Right.
Without it being exploitative and harmful and abusive.
Right.
And to have that with that kind of love and safety and professionalism, really, of boundaries, of stability. You just know, like this therapist, you can just count on this therapist knowing how to manage this over time. Just imagine what that would feel like as a client. It was just like, I have total trust in this person, and they're going to hold my hand, and they're not going to exploit me. They're not going to hurt me. They're not going to shame me.
Right.
And just to have that feeling, it's profound. It's neurological. It's deep. It's life changing. So why would we not do that as therapists if we're able to do that, if we're comfortable with it, Mm-hmm. And if we're uncomfortable with it, are we uncomfortable for the wrong reasons?
Right.
So, going on. Afterwards, I told a couple of people about my experience, and they reacted very strongly, badly. They even reacted strongly to just the hug. I had just had this deeply healing experience, but now I felt I shouldn't even talk about it. Or maybe I should even question it to begin with.
Yeah.
I discussed this with my therapist, and she said that touch is taboo with a lot of therapists, and that many have a blanket no-touch rule. Bob, what do you think about that?
I think it's true and ridiculous all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sorry about the response of the uninformed and uninitiated, because it's hard. It's the brain is set up to believe the bad stuff. So when somebody says, "Oh, that's wrong" or "icky" or whatever, even though it's fine, in fact, it's healing and reparative. It's hard not to be impacted by ignorance.
Yeah.
And so I feel sad about that. That sucks.
Yeah. There are pockets in our country and particularly around the world, but if we were to look at a particular pocket in an exaggeratory sense of the Deep South in the 1920s or the 1840s or something, and you're a white person, and you raise the question as to whether or not black people are humans as well, that they deserve rights, or that they should not be slaves, or they should not be suppressed regarding the vote or something. If you are a white person and you're in a social gathering with a bunch of white people, and you were to bring up this idea, we understand, looking back, that you're going to get a lot of frowns and maybe even some major pushback on those ideas.
Right.
Well, that's the world we live in regarding touch today.
Yeah.
you bring up the topic of touch and therapy, or in a lot of circumstances outside of therapy, if you were to bring up the normal, dare I say, socially just topic of how touch is important and okay and can be facilitated in an ethical way, even among other therapists, you're going to get some very fucking weird, regressive answers from people.
Yeah.
And that's just the state of our culture right now. Yeah. And it's not getting any better. In fact, I think it's getting worse. Not only as our society becomes more disjointed and less in contact with other humans. Yeah. Like, it's not uncommon to have a human being today who might literally not touch another human being for months. Right. Like, not a single touch, you know, especially with the pandemic and everything. Right. Yeah. You know, no incidental touching at all. And I'm not saying we have to have that, but to have touching other humans being so foreign to people, you know? So it's a weird world. And with the professionalism of our profession, which is a good thing, things become simplified, and the idea of like, well, you can't have sex with your clients. Okay. And then, but people just generalize that to say like any touch is a slippery slope to having sex or is sexual or something, you know, like it reminds me of this one reality TV show that I watched, 90 Day Fiancé. And there was this guy from Samoa who was in Portland, Oregon, and he was marrying a Samoan, half Samoan American woman. And the Samoan guy had his family come over to visit, and he hadn't seen his mom in a long time. And so they're in Portland downtown, and they hug, and they're kissing, and they kissed on the lips. It looked like they briefly kissed on the lips. This Samoan man, I don't know, 25, 30 years old, kissed his mom on the lips briefly. And his wife, the Samoan American woman, was shaming him for this and saying like, did you kiss her? And he's like, what? He's like, that's what we do in my culture or something. Yeah. That's what me and my mom do. And his wife is just like, oh my God, that's so disgusting. And like, she was just without any hesitation or any change or nuance to her approach. She's just like, you're disgusting. That's disgusting. What's wrong with you? It's creepy. And that really shows you something about our society, right? And I said, no, that's not weird. I kiss my mom on the lips. I don't fucking make out with my mother. But I kiss her on the lips. When I was a kid, my parents both kissed all of us on the lips. Not long, not lingering, but it was, it's a kiss of affection, you know?
It's affection, yeah.
And, in other countries, other societies, other cultures, they will kiss on the cheek, right? It's not that different from that. And I got blasted for that. People are just like, ew, creepy. I'm just thinking, what is wrong with you that you would think that me, Kirk, kissing my own mother on the lips when I say hello to her after not seeing her for a while, what's wrong with you that you think that there's something creepy about that? Like, it'd be like if a mother were to change their child's diaper and wipe them down and look at that as if it's creepy, or breastfeeding. People will. They'll be like, ew, gross, breastfeeding. Yeah,
just because we're weird.
Like, what the fuck is wrong with our society? Yeah. And it should not affect us as clinicians. Yeah. We should know better. Yeah. There are lots of things, whether it's racism in history or current, whether it's this taboo regarding touch, whether it's taboo regarding talking about your feelings or about traumas. We should know better. The rest of society, who God fucking knows, they'll figure it out, hopefully, eventually. I don't know. But we should not be absorbing those ridiculousn's. Now,
you're suggesting that we have an ethical duty to get beyond our own biases.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Now, I'm not saying all therapists need to agree to touching. If someone came to me and said, I understand what you're saying, and at the same time, I don't want to have any touch in my office, I would say totally fine.
Good to know your own limit.
It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
It's not super critical. There's a lot of pros to having that firm line around those kinds of things.
Right.
But I imagine there are a lot of therapists that, left to their own devices, would be wanting, to provide that sort of help,
Right.
like hugging briefly at the end of session, or
Right.
sitting next to a client while they cry,
Right.
or holding the hand of a client as they have a panic attack, for example.
Right.
I imagine there's a lot of therapists that have that impulse to do it, but refrain because of our stupid culture.
This is why good supervision is a really important, absolutely important
Yeah.
aspect of training.
Yeah. So going on with the end of the email, my therapist reassured me that her decision was very considered, and her key consideration was what helps me and what is safe for me. And that conversation with my therapist was reassuring.
Right on.
So what are your views on touch and therapy? Do you have a blanket no touch rule? No. We've already answered that. Do you think it can be very powerful if used carefully and with clear boundaries?
Yes.
What role do you think the genders of the client and the therapist play, Bob?
Probably, just to be plain about it, that this is not a sexual thing. This is not about any kind of, on the part of the therapist, acting out any kind of erotic feeling. Erotic feelings might arise in a client, right? And if they arise in a therapist, then you really gotta get consultation about that. It could happen, and if it happens, it's not like bad, but to not address it would be a huge mistake, especially because it could leave one blind to what's happening with their client. But if a client had erotic feelings, and occasionally that will happen, they just get to be talked about just like anything else.
Now, are there some therapists that will exploit their clients? Yeah, I've talked about this for years. I have whole episodes dedicated to this. I think the episodes in question are called "A Therapist Kisses His Client" or something.
I remember that wasn't that long ago.
And it's a problem. But for the normal therapists like you and me, the idea of erotic feelings even being in the ballpark of these experiences with clients is absurd to me. The times where I have hugged a client or held their hand or sat next to them or put my hand on their back as they're walking out the door, there hasn't been a single ounce of sexuality or sexual attraction at all. The amount of love and care and warmth and attentiveness and good is just all that I can sense. It's just all that's there, right?
Yeah.
In the same way that if I hug or kiss my mom, there's no sexuality to it
it's just
for
affection.
either one of us.
Yep.
It's totally normal.
Yeah.
Again, if you have trauma around that, if you've been exploited in that way, yes, it does happen. But it doesn't mean we just completely throw all of that away,
right,
because of our puritanical, Victorian, anti-touch, anti-creep culture. It's really a problem. And I guess the final thing I'll say, as a patron, is don't talk about it with people that you can't trust, because it'll just interfere.
Right.
In the same way that in the 1840s, if a white person came to me and said, I want to talk about helping black people to become free of slavery, I would say, you got to be careful about who you talk. You're right, but you have to be careful about who you disclose that to, because you can be harmed.
Yeah.
And that's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
And I think it's worse now. Does it feel worse now to you? You don't really have a sense of the internet culture like I do, but do you have any sense of it being worse now?
Well, I have a sense of the political culture, and it is worse now. We are very divided. We are really suspicious. We, in many cases, believe all the wrong stuff, and just have our heads up our butts when it comes to wisdom and humanity. It's a fucking mess.
Yeah.
I don't know about the internet culture, because it's as you say, I don't.
Well, I don't know if I call it internet culture, but in my observation, commensurate with the Me Too movement, which I 100% support, of course.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
There's a commensurate increase in hyper awareness around creepiness, which I think is half a good thing and half a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the bad part is what I'm talking about. But, it's not like we had a unbusted up vibe regarding touch before all that. So it's just another factor, I think.
Yeah, another factor.
All right, take a break. Get back. More emails. What do you think? All right, this next email is from patron Morgan. Morgan says, Bob, first off, thank you. You are a beacon of kindness and a beacon of warmth for some of us that didn't get to experience those things from our dads.
Thanks, Morgan.
How does it make you feel, Bob, to be other people's warm and kind dad?
Touched and teary.
Thank you for being a parasocial corrective experience for me each and every time I hear you speak.
You're hired, Morgan.
My question for you is this. Do you ever experience a compelling need to freeze when your relational trauma is triggered? Like you get stuck in needing something like a hug, love, or care from your partner, but you get stuck in the scared mode. For me, I become paralyzed, like I'm overwhelmed with all my personal failures, with all my not good enoughs. And I expect my partner to notice me and help me, and I want this help, but I'm stuck and I'm scared to ask for it. He's never given me a reason not to trust that he will care for me, and he often will without question. And by the way, I grew up with a dad with a personality disorder. I'm now a clinician specializing in personality disorders.
Right on.
I can help others with similar trauma, but I can't seem to shake the visceral feeling of shame, anger, and fright when I'm in this mode. What advice would you give to someone like me? Thank you.
Well, the first part of your question is, does that ever happen to me? All the time. And it's really lonely. I'm sorry it's happening to you. I feel sad for both of us. I have a sense of anything I might want is going to be experienced as intrusive or rejectable. And so there are times when I want that I don't ask. And it can lead me to feeling resentful because Colleen can't do anything about what she's not aware of. And it's as you say, your partner hasn't given you any reason to distrust, and neither has mine. And I think actually she would really like it if I reached for her more.
Yeah. You don't think that. You know that. You've talked about it a lot.
Yeah. She would like that. I do know that. Yeah. And then the other thing that comes to mind is something our couple therapist said to us last week. He said, the thing about being vulnerable is it feels really scary when you're first doing it. But if you do it enough, vulnerable starts feeling good because you have a felt sense that, it's like a trust fall. If you fall, you will be caught. And falling can be thrilling then because I know you're going to catch me, right? So there is that possibility for us. I notice in me a recognition of that fact. And at the same time, man, this fucking willfulness that just keeps me locked up. And
what's the sentence that runs through your mind with that willfulness?
The sentence that runs through my mind. I don't think I understand your question.
What part of you that is being willful, that part of you, how would it justify itself?
Oh, well, occasionally angry, like, well, she should know what I need. Right? That'd be one version of it.
I told her last month. Or
right. I shouldn't have to ask is a version of it. And, yesterday I was at this training, and part of the training was, they do these role plays, right? So we all break up into these small groups and we do these role plays. And so I'm playing the role of a partner, and I have a partner, and then there's a therapist, right? And I don't do good at acting. So I don't ever act when I do these things. I just use me. So I just will involve myself. And actually the feedback I got is, wow, that's a hell of a character you're playing. And I'm like, I ain't playing a character, guys. I'm just, this is how I am, right? And my partner said, that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. And it was humiliating to hear her say it.
What is a cop-out?
something that I was saying that I'm not willing to talk about something. And
during the role play.
During the role play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. She was playing partner.
I thought you said it was a cop out that you said, this is me.
No. I don't think anybody. No, during the role play, I'm playing a spouse.
And you were saying what?
I was saying, I don't want to talk to you. I don't feel safe talking to you.
And as a partner
in the role play, she was frustrated with me, and she said to me twice or three times, well, that's a cop-out. And that was humiliating, embarrassing to hear her say it. And I actually started thinking about it, after that, and then during the rest of the day yesterday. And there's a part of me, let me start over. I agree with her. I mean, I think cop-out's a bit loaded and a bit...
blamey.
Blamey, yeah. But
did you get angry at her? Did she notice your feeling?
I don't know. That would have been interesting to find out. And I got the sense from her that if she and I wanted to talk about that she would have been totally cool in the gang with.
You didn't decompress after the role play?
We processed the therapist experience, not the client experience.
You gotta process your feelings.
Well, that's not. Anyways, cop out might be a judgmental way of putting it. I think what she's saying is you're engaging your own passivity, and you're not willing to step beyond yourself, which I think is actually an even-handed way of saying it. Mm-hmm. And I am vulnerable to that. And so...
It's like an excuse.
Yeah.
An avoidance.
And it's it's like you said, I heard you say earlier, sometimes you say, when you come to your deathbed, you're not going to embrace all the times you were afraid and, refuse to step beyond yourself. That's really true. So, okay, I'm stuck with it. And I mean, to some degree, I'm stuck with it. But each moment I have a choice. Like I have a choice. So this morning, Colleen was waking up. I was waking up, and I sort of cuddled up to her and just chit-chatting, blah, blah, blah. And I said, tonight, let's go over to the pub, and we'll have dinner over at the pub, this pub Ridgecrest, this pub we like to go to. Mm-hmm. And yesterday, she's been knitting a sweater. And so I asked her about it. Like, I don't think I would have. I muted the TV and paid my attention to, the sweater. And she actually talked about the sweater she's knitting. And
so you had the impulse to cop out.
Yeah.
And you decided not to.
Not to.
How did you do that?
I just said, tell me about your sweater.
But how did you overcome the fear and the old tapes playing in your head of avoiding?
The thought that goes through my head is Colleen is in my care. Like we are in each other's care. That's the nature of a relationship. In our case, a marriage. That's the nature of a partnership. And as such, she is in my care, and caring about her is stepping beyond myself. It's not enough to say, golly, I've got this shitty history and I'm really scared. Yeah. And that by itself is a disservice to my partner to just automatically succumb to that and wait for later.
So by asking about the sweater, it was like opening up a conversation.
Yeah, I'm like saying, shit, I don't know how you do that. And that looks really complicated. And it's really lovely seeing you engage this way. And gosh, you're really proud of it, aren't you? And, some like, it's okay to buy more yarn if you need it, because she needed some more yarn. And it's like just a friendly reminder that it's okay to do that. But basically just engaging her around what she's up to. Because what she does is she turned her office into her room where she's going to do her knitting. She's got a really nice chair in there. And she did a nice job with it. It's fairly cozy. And I got the bowling table desk a couple weeks ago. Do you ever see that table?
Bowling table?
Yeah, it's like a bowling alley. It's about 7 feet long and as wide as a bowling alley, because it is a bowling alley. It's a piece of a bowling alley. Well, we had some legs put on the bottom of it, and it's a table, a sizey one, as you could imagine. And that was in her room. Her room's a little bit smaller than my room. She's like, do you want the table? And anyways, we swapped desks. My desk very small. So that fits in her room really well. And now she has room for a chair. And she's made this den where she sits. She's been sitting there for the last week, knitting, watching her show, watching knitting videos or whatever.
Well, what about your needs?
I'm thinking.
Because that's how this whole thing started was.
Right. Well, okay, so yeah, right, I'm getting a little tangential. Colleen is in my care.
Yeah.
And as a person who's in my care, one of the things that I owe her is to be more open.
Okay.
About
But what
my
about
needs.
your needs?
That's what I mean, to be more open about my needs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So how were you open about your needs?
Oh, I haven't done that yet.
Okay. But this is the catalyst,
This is the catalyst.
the connection to
Yeah.
facilitate.
Like this, an embracing of the fact that we are in each other's care.
Yeah.
Because it's like...
So is that another avoidance to attend to her?
It would be an avoidance if it stops there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think it's actually really useful.
Yeah.
Because she might say, how's your sweater going? Yeah, it's going okay. Okay, great. Moving on, watching Spider-Man.
Right.
Right. Instead of actually engaging her,
Yeah.
But
you know what I'm saying, the Butler syndrome.
Right. Well, what she said to me a couple weeks ago is, I know if I turn to you, you'll be there. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but do you ever have the sense that I don't ask enough of our relationship? And
Yeah.
she said, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not enough that I'm available to her if she needs me. And in fact, I could imagine it feels kind of lonely because it's not a bilateral, it's not a two-way street, So, look, I'll be honest, I don't want to do any of it. I just recognize that I owe her.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of owing her, I have a shot at doing something useful for myself.
You owe her, yeah. You also are owed.
That one's harder.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm listening.
Yeah.
It's hard, man, I just think that the stuff inside me is bad. So, like, I'll forego just dumb shit. Like, honey, can you bring me a fork? I'll
Right.
just get up and get a fork. I guess it's useful to be self-sufficient, but it's really, it's adaptive when you're alone, but it's a bug when you're in a partnership. So, but that stuff happens to me all the time. Big stuff and little stuff.
I mean, just to put a fine point on it.
No, I get it.
For the listeners, is that you started out by saying that you avoid through the mindset that it's doomed or that she's a bad person or a bad partner. The stepping out of that involves being a butler exclusively, which is closer, but still avoidant of your needs.
Yeah.
Maybe indirectly getting your needs met because there's some goodwill between the two of you,
Yeah.
which feels probably good to you, better than being at odds or at distance, but not really.
Not really.
And how that felt to you as you were giving the narrative as that's the solution. I'll put on this earth to serve her. End of paragraph, end of chapter, end of book.
Yeah.
And then I was like, when is this going to get, because this whole thing started with an avoidance of your needs, and so I thought, okay, we're eventually.
Is he going to come around, or is he just going to talk about clever way about how to meet Colleen's needs and avoid, right?
Yeah, but to you, it felt right. It felt like that's the solution, It felt like, yep, job done. That's the good place, And then
Right, that's true.
But it's still another avoidance
Yeah.
and still denying of your needs.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really vulnerable to that. Something really profound happened to me a couple weeks ago. I canceled seeing you because I was doing a plumbing project.
Mhm, yeah.
It took 5 days, 55 hours of just all day, all 5 days, to get it done.
Yeah.
And
So, well, just to paint a picture for people, you can elaborate, but from what you were telling me, and I told you that I could relate because when I was doing
Right.
my heavy home remodel project years ago, I would have these moments where one, you and I were not professionals in these construction fields.
No.
But we know enough to be able to muddle our way through it.
Yeah.
But it's really inefficient. We might not have the right tools.
Yeah.
We're pathologically independent, so we're doing it alone without any secondary hands to help us.
This is a fact.
We get bogged down. We're doing it on our off time. Like I remember this one, just to paint a scene, is I was renovating my bathroom, and there was in the attic, I was going to take down the drywall from the ceiling, and in the attic was all this really horrible insulation from the 50s that is called rock wool.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, I think, basically the shavings from inside of a coal refinery plant pipe.
Wow.
Like a smokestack. On the inside will coagulate this material that is, if you touch it, it turns instantly into dust. But if you are careful with it, it's fluffy. It's fluffy coal dust and iron. It has a lot of minerals in it too.
Mineral. Yeah.
And I was trying to deal with it, but it was so hard. And this is before the internet was very good,
right.
But the internet was kind of good enough for me to learn that it was very toxic to breathe in the dust of this stuff, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to do this all myself because I don't have money to pay anyone to do anything. So,
right.
I just said, I think I'm just going to have to just do it all in one fell swoop. So I got plastic and put it up all around the bathroom. And then I went in there with a respirator, a filter, and goggles, and just tore down all the drywall from the ceiling, which in the summer as well. And so I'm hot and I'm sweaty. So as all this rock wool insulation is coming raining down on top, because that was the plan. I was like, well, this is the only way. And I just remember the sweat and the dust sticking to my head because, sweating.
Right.
And it was getting into every nook and cranny.
Right.
And the respirator is good, but it's not perfect, And I just remember thinking like, and this was just one of those times,
Right.
and it's like all weekend long.
Yeah.
And I probably screwed things up and got a little frustrated and just started like tearing shit off and breaking stuff along the way and go, I'll fix it fucking later. I don't care. And you go down this and it's like 11:30 at night and
right.
And no one even cares that you're doing it. You're thinking, did I fuck it up? Was there a better way? You just get in your head, and it just becomes this deep pit of anger and despair and discomfort and demoralization. Like it can get pretty bad.
Pretty intense.
So that's what was happening to you.
Oh, for 2 days.
A couple weeks ago.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
Because you're under the house, you're doing plumbing.
Plumbing under the house. Mostly in the garage, but yes, under the house. Crawling around in rat poop and rat pee and saying,
that's what you're saying.
Here's how the rats are getting into how they're getting into my crawl space under my house. It's kind of a gross place to be. And
I mean, if it's rat pee, that means rats were there recently.
Oh yeah, I can smell them easily there, and I can smell them, and it doesn't matter. They're definitely there. And it's 2 feet tall, so it is literally a crawl space. That's the only way to get around.
Yeah.
So I'm dragging a bag of tools, including a torch, because I gotta sweat some pipe, and I'm planning out in my head, how's what I'm going to do, and like swearing. Colleen is literally right above me because it's under the living room, and she's hearing me. Anyways, and that actually went pretty smooth. I was under there for about an hour and a half. And the thing I needed to do, I got done pretty quick and relatively quick. But the rest of the weekend, it took me 5 days, 3 days to get the water back on and 5 days to get the hot water going. So it was just like on the ground in my garage, just desperately wanting to scream my head off and needing her to hear me, but not knowing what the hell I needed her to do or what for, just like...
Well, looking back, what do you think you needed?
I think some validation and care.
Yeah.
And actually,
appreciation for working hard.
Yeah. She came out twice, and one of those times she's like, come on, she just dragged me back into the house and sat down, and I was describing to her how unbearable, like, the shame that comes for me is when I fail, and how I feel this, like, awful compulsion to get it right. And she's like, we can hire somebody, which of course is technically true. But like, we don't have water now. So, I don't know.
Well, plus it doesn't address the emotional.
Oh, not even close.
Would it have helped if she said, maybe she did eventually, said, I love you even if you fuck this up?
She did say that, and that was her attitude. She put up with 5 days of me, these long days and, moments of, hey, it's going okay. And then mostly, no, it's not, because mostly it wasn't. She said several times, look, this is you. I know you're going to get it done, and it's going to be good because that's all you do. You get it done and it's okay. So, I asked her to validate me. I was like, yep, you're right, Bob. It doesn't work right now. That is true. I asked her, it's like, well, what can I do? And I said, can you just validate that it's not working? Yep, it's not working. It doesn't mean that it's not going to work, but it's just not working now. Let's see, this came up because, the reason that came to mind was because I absolutely had a need and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was.
And you were melting down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over the span of days.
Yeah. Right. Like during the Husky game, the championship game, I was out in my garage just trying to get the water back on. Almost got there that night, got it the next day, but so I guess the reason it came to mind is because I wonder about the needs I have that I just don't even notice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's normal anyway.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Really? Is that normal? Like, do you have that?
Yeah.
How does it, like, can you tell a story?
Well, a similar but less melty downy story recently. I'm sure one's in my brain somewhere. Well, so unfortunately being an H-level celebrity on the internet means that you're going to have some people that scare the shit out of you and make threats and
oh shit,
involve the police and the FBI and all that. I told you about all that.
Yeah,
right?
you did. That's true.
And I don't have a gun or a Bowie knife. I didn't take martial arts like you did. So I did take wrestling and football so I could tackle them and sort of pin them to the ground. But that doesn't necessarily help if they have an AK-47 pointed at me. But
no.
I worry, and my wife worries too, probably more than me. And I mainly worry about her being hurt, honestly. I don't really worry ongoing about me. Yeah. But I have invested a lot of time and effort into a pretty robust security system.
Yeah.
And the way that these security companies advertise, it's just like lickety fucking split, and they install it or you install it and everything works fine. It never works that way. There's so many annoyances. It's just a constant thorn in my side. I'm constantly looking
glitches,
looking at Reddit threads about how to fix this or functionalities that don't work quite right or as advertised, or there's just so many things. And so I spend, I don't spend a lot of time, but I do spend time, and I think of myself as doing it 60% for Stacy and 40% for me.
Yeah.
Because she was like, we had our house broken into 5 years ago or something, and I was kind of relaxed about the whole experience, but Stacy was really rattled by it.
Just the one up in Shoreline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I, at first, was like, well, she'll get over it. I've had my house broken into before. It's not pleasant. It's a total violation, but it'll pass. But it didn't pass for her. And she's not the sort of person to really hit the solution hard. Do you know what I mean? She is in this realm kind of paralyzed in a way.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, as a favor to her, and I guess it's sort of a man's job if I was to follow my socialization.
Boy job.
That I have to do this for us, and I would benefit from it too.
Yeah.
And so for 5-6 years, I've been doing this thing that I would not probably have done if, one, I wasn't living with her, and two, if she hadn't been rattled by that whole experience.
Right.
And so whenever I'm working on it, because it'll take, I work too much as it is, and then on my days off, I'm spending like 7 hours problem solving this thing, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that, I got to get outside, and I have to start installing things, and I have to start wiring things, and I have to figure out how to get the signal to work, and it's just a lot of things. Anyway,
Yeah, I
have
can
to
imagine.
call the security company and like problem solve with them, which is a whole fucking nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
And so every once in a while, I'll start to have a meltdown around it, especially when I'm doing it and I'm just like, this is the few 4 hours this week that I don't have to work. And I'm, so this is just me independent of thinking about Stacy. I'm just like, and I'm wasting it doing this fucking thing.
Yeah.
And then this, thought creeps in of just like, and at the end of the day, Stacy won't even know, or if I alert her to what I have done, she won't appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this for her.
Yeah.
You just get this,
Oh,
she's not even in the realm of what's happening, but I'm already angry at her.
Yeah, right. I get that.
So I noticed that. And at some point I was able to tell myself, oh, you want appreciation. Okay.
Good for you.
And so then I, at some point, maybe, I don't know, a month ago or something, we were talking about a bunch of things. And I think I just explicitly said to her, so when I work on this security system, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, but I'm doing it mostly for you because I want you to feel safe. And I also want you to be safe.
Yeah.
And I think about this. I think about it a lot, and I'm pretty obsessive about it.
Mm.
And I work really hard on it, and it can get really frustrating. And I'm just looking for some appreciation. I just want to know that it matters to you, or that you care, or something. And she was nice in the moment, but then like a couple weeks later, I was toiling away at it again, and I brought it up later in the evening, and I said, I spent a few hours on the security system again. And she like explicitly said, thank you for doing that for me. She said that.
Wow. Did it help?
Yeah, it definitely helped.
Right on.
Yeah. So this was a question as to whether or not I would notice my feelings. I probably had that feeling that I wasn't acknowledging for months before that moment, a month ago or two, when I finally just really saw it, But I'd had probably for years maybe had moments where I would be miffy around her because of this unknown kind of resentment that is illogical because I haven't told her, but was there and affecting me and her. So yeah, it's pretty normal, I would say.
Okay.
I think wanting appreciation is a very common ignored need that adults have.
Huh. I'll think about that. Thanks. Good story.
Let's take a break. One more email.
Yep.
All right. Question for Bob and Kirk. YouTube member Kate from Honolulu.
Wow.
She says, hi, Bob and Kirk. I'm a young person who went to therapy for about a year. I enjoyed therapy as a way to reflect on my actions and thoughts. But my therapist, so I'm a young person who went to therapy for about a year. I enjoyed therapy as a way to reflect on my actions and my thoughts. But my therapist asked me multiple times if I wanted to return. It felt as if she didn't think I needed therapy and sometimes felt I wasn't a priority in the therapist's eyes, I think. Eventually, I stopped going for financial reasons. So just kind of sifting through this, what do you think Kate is saying exactly?
I think Kate's saying at the end of the session, her therapist said, you want to come back? And the question itself is a bit off-putting because it says, sends the message that, you don't really need to be here, but, if you want to come back. And that's an off-putting message for a client.
Right.
If I had to guess, I'd say the therapist didn't have an attitude of, you don't really need to be here, but was probably trying too hard to be non-presumptuous.
Right.
And
Do you do that?
Yeah, guilty.
Yeah. In a bad way?
These days, what I'll say to my people is, okay, do I see you next week? At our usual whatever. But I never say, do you want to come back?
Yeah. There's different severities of that question.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I don't even know if I've ever talked out loud about this, but it is a very interesting aspect of therapy, this question at the end, particularly with clients where you're not exactly sure, because some clients, because it's explicit that they're in it to win it and they want to be in therapy for a long time. But there's a number of clients where it's not super explicit, and I never want to assume. So I don't want to pressure people, because some people might want to take a break for a week or longer or something.
Right.
And so with some clients, I'll intuit that it would be safer to say, so do you want to schedule? I'll say something like that. So do you want to schedule for next week? And if they say yes, but it does run the risk of sending this message of confusion of either I don't want to see you, or I don't think you need therapy, or I don't think this is going to last very long.
Right.
Which I don't want to send because that's really antithetical to my work. If I were a brief therapist, then I would say, go ahead and ask questions along those lines.
Right.
So it is kind of making me rethink that.
Me too.
I do. Once I figure out that they're in it to win it, then I stop asking it that way. But I probably ask it longer than I need to, because I do know with many clients, I just say, all right, let's schedule for next week. Something like that.
Right. It's just a cue to get your calendars out.
Yeah.
Not a question about whether or not you're planning to see one another.
Yeah.
Or about the client's motivation.
I guess if I think about it, the best thing to do, given my style, would be when this emerges in my head as a topic that needs to be discussed, like the last few minutes of the session, I would say, okay, so we're about to wrap up. Mm-hmm. At the end of session, I will ask you if you want to schedule an appointment next week. And I just want to be clear as to what I'm asking when I'm asked that, because I don't want to assume anything. And I want you to know that if you want to take a break, you can. I don't want you to take a break. If you want to take a break, then but I like working with you, and I want to see you next week, and we have a lot to work on, and I'm excited to work on those things with you. And to be honest, I'm the sort of therapist that if you stay in therapy with me for years and years, like, I'm your man.
Yeah.
And there won't be any qualms or thoughts about it at all for me. It's completely dependent on what you want.
Right.
But I also don't want to pressure you to see me forever, or to even have at the pace, if you want to start going every other week or something. So
it's like a high demand situation.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my position.
Right.
Which I don't necessarily tell every client.
Right. I don't think I've ever said that, but
yeah,
I think I should.
And then I would say so then I might say, so when I ask, do you want to schedule for next week? That's where that question comes from.
Right.
It's not implying anything.
Right.
And, but really when I think about it now, I think if a client wants to take a break, I wouldn't want it to be expressed through the, it's such a dumb, it's such a dumb premise of like,
it is.
So I'm going to ask a client like, so do you want to schedule for next week? And they're like, no. And then that's the only conversation we have.
This is how we're going to talk about whether or not, you're going to stop coming.
Right. So it requires a bigger caveat to introduce the topics.
Yeah.
So I guess what I might say is say all that, and then I would say, so at the end of session, I will say, let's schedule for next week. That isn't saying you should be scheduling next week or pressuring you. So if I detect something, I'll bring it up. But in all likelihood, you will be the one to introduce the topic as to whether or not you want to take a break or slow down or, just do something else in therapy or whatever. Right. If I detect that we might be heading in that direction, I might ask, but I might not.
Yeah.
So when I ask at the end of the session, let's schedule for next week, or when do you want to see me next week? Or do you want to, or I'll just see you next week. I might just say that. That would be a more proactive approach.
Yeah, proactive, overt. And then it's, chances are, well, I was about to say, what I always say to the folks who write in is you should talk about this with your therapist, because it's just muddy. That's probably mostly what it is, but its impact sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because clearly, the person that wrote in very much enjoying their experience of therapy and finding it useful. Yeah. And chances are that the therapist has a felt sense that that's the case. Probably really liked working with them.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what Kate is saying, because Kate's saying, my therapist asked me multiple times if I wanted to return. So
does that mean I stopped coming and my therapist reached out?
Well, it felt as if she didn't think I needed therapy, and I sometimes felt I wasn't a priority to her. Eventually, I stopped going for financial reasons.
Oh.
She goes on to say, I liked therapy and having someone to talk to, and I'm trying to decide if it's worth it to start going again. What are some tips or information that is helpful when someone is deciding if therapy is right for them?
Oh.
End of email.
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that, because I think everybody can benefit from going to therapy. Yeah. And, it sort of depends on where you are, but I think all of us have attachment insecurity to some degree that could benefit from learning about in personal counseling. So, do I need it? It depends on how you define that word. Like, what's your goal in life? So I don't think I'm going to be very useful in my response to the person that wrote in, except, yeah,
I think it's a good response. The only thing I'll add is you can go to therapy, and I've had clients come to me for this reason, to identify a reason to go to therapy.
Yeah, why not?
You can come to therapy and be like, I think I need therapy, but I actually don't know what I should be working on.
Right.
Like when you have a motivation to go to therapy, Bob, you know why you're going.
Yeah.
I'm going because of X, Y, and Z.
A couple therapists told me to.
Yeah. I want to change this about myself. Yeah. I want to heal from this.
Right.
I want to improve this relationship. And it's normal for people not to have that at the forefront of their mind, because we're not in a society that values that kind of exploration. Right.
Yeah.
And there's still pockets of people and cultures where you only go to therapy if you're quote unquote crazy.
Right.
So there's that. The other thing is it's important to find the right therapist, because if you went to a particular kind of therapist and said, I don't know why I'm in therapy, but I want to explore that, there's a good percentage, I would say at least 25% of therapists that would say, well, then you shouldn't be in therapy.
Yeah, I did that once. Dumbest thing. I discouraged somebody from coming because they didn't have a specific goal. Yeah. And my supervisor said, don't do that, and I did it anyways. And I think about that person. She was lovely, and it was a total bonehead move. Yeah. And she did exactly what you could imagine. She stopped coming.
I don't know if I'd call it bonehead, because it has its logic to it. If someone came into a dentist and said, I need you to do something to my teeth, and they're like, well, what's wrong? They're like, nothing, or I don't know. And then they do an examination and there's nothing going on. And the dentist's like, I don't know what you want me to do. And the patient's just like, well, I just feel like you should be doing something. And the dentist would be, I'm sorry, I can't proceed until I have something to go off of. So until then, you're going to have to leave.
But the good thing about therapy is you can be self-reflective. Like, I don't see anything that needs working on, but that doesn't mean there isn't something here. Obviously, you want something.
I'm just saying that bonehead and I would personally say it was a bonehead move if I did it too. So, but I just want to say that there's a whole section of therapists that's their bread and butter, is to be clear about those things. And there's a lot of good to that. The problem is if you have a client like Kate who might benefit from a therapist like you and me, they won't know where to find therapists like you and me, or what keywords. And those keywords might not even exist.
Right.
So you just have to try out a few.
Yeah.
So Kate, if you do that,
Yeah.
stay with the therapist that says, ooh, I like it.
Yeah.
Well, let's start somewhere.
Yeah.
How's your life going? Or
I love that. That's a great start.
how are you feeling right now?
Right.
What's going on in your relationships?
Yeah.
Because that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Because there's always something.
Yeah.
And then I would say, okay, well, so that's something. Would you like to work on that? Mm-hmm. And if the client's like, yeah, no, okay, well, keep going, keep exploring.
Right.
And I might say like, look, for as long as you want to explore this, I'm here to explore it with you. I'm not going to kick you out of the office for not having a goal yet.
Right.
We have a goal of trying to find a goal, and that's okay.
Yeah, that is, yeah. And the therapist that they had might be a really good one. They liked going, and they found it useful and like talking to that person. Maybe that person just needs some orientation. Maybe they're workable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kay says, I liked therapy.
Yeah.
The final thing I'll say is that there are schemas related to this that I've treated before. I'm sure you have too, Bob, where people will have issues that will highly affect the way they feel about the therapist and the therapy in general. Meaning that they have issues, but they're in a habit of denying their issues and of avoiding, and people outside of them may or may not even be able to identify issues in them because they might be effective at being able to mask it, but other people might be able to see it's like, oh my God, yeah, you need therapy. And the individual is like, really? Do you think so? So there's a lot of obscuring of one's issues, but you're thinking, well, but I feel like maybe there's something there, but you need a lot of help with a therapist to even look at yourself.
Right.
It's not automatic that humans can even begin to answer the question,
right.
Do I need therapy and what do I need to work on?
Yeah.
So that's one issue. The other issue is that there's schemas and relational traumas related to sitting down in the client's chair in the therapy office of avoidance and suspicion of the whole process,
right.
that can result in the client sitting there and evading a lot of different, I've had clients in the first session where they sit down and they're like, I want to work on, I'm trying to think of an example. They might say, well, my life is falling apart and I just feel like maybe therapy would be a good idea. So just that opening sentence, it's not clear, right? It's like, my life is falling apart and I think maybe I need therapy, right? It has a hint of something that I'll get to in a second. And then I'm okay. So I don't know the landscape. So I'm just asking, okay, what's going on? Because usually when you ask clients what's going on, they just ramble for the rest of the session, because there's so much they got to get off their chest. I don't have to pull things out of people, right? So, okay, tell me what's going on. And they're like, well, regular life, pause. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, so regular life. And so I'm really carrying a lot of the weight, in this conversation. Okay, regular life. And it gives some people get nervous or whatever. And so I feel it's my duty to carry that weight in the beginning anyway.
Sure.
So, okay, so your life's falling apart. Is that what you said earlier? Well, no, I wouldn't say my life's falling apart. I mean, come on, let's not be dramatic. And then, okay. Well, earlier you said that, life was difficult and that's why you're here. Right. So, what's going on there?
Right.
And they might give some really lackluster detail about their life. It's like, oh, well, the pandemic has been difficult or something.
Right.
Okay. It just kind of continues to go in that vein.
Right.
And then I, at some point, will feel like, okay, I feel like I'm fighting with the client.
Right.
So I might say something like, so, okay, I want to just write, because I always have a clipboard in the first session. So I say, okay, I just want to get down in my notes at least one goal, just one thing that you want to change about your life or your relationships or the way you think or your emotions or trauma or something. Sure. I just want to get one thing down on my noteboard, on my clipboard here, so that I can have something to go from, because until we get that, I don't know where to begin. I feel like you've told me some details, which is great. Yeah. But so if there was one thing that you want to work on, one thing you'd like to change, what would that be? And I'll never forget this one client who was doing this to me. She says, well, I don't know. What do you mean? So I asked the question again. I'm being very polite and very diplomatic, even though I'm like, so I do it again. And then she says, well, you're the doctor. You tell me. Right. And I'm like, how the fuck did we get here? This is 19 minutes into the session. Right. And you're already angry at me because I'm asking you what you want to do. Yeah. Like the implication is that I pulled you in off the street and I'm trying to tell you that there's something wrong with you. Yeah, like, I don't know. Clearly there is something wrong with you, but
I'm learning all about it.
I'm seeing it right now. There are personality disorders and schemas that can result in this. Right. And so now that's one example of that. But if a friend of mine or someone were to come to me like Kate and say a similar kind of presentation, it's pretty brief what Kate's saying. Yeah. But there's a chance that even though in your mind you go to a therapist next, Kate, and say, I really want to find out what I want to do in therapy, you could have something subconscious that's getting in the way of you even giving enough material to the client or to the therapist. Yeah. For the therapist to even begin the process, and just to conclude this bit here is that for the clients that have come to me with this presentation, of which I can off the top of my head think of a handful, and I remember them because it's so weird and it's actually kind of rough for me. It feels dangerous. Right. And given certain professional policies that I have, I'll do a lot. And I feel like I'm pretty good at coming at it from a lot of angles in the first session, because I'm pretty adamant about having the therapy goals emerge from the client and not from me. Yeah. And I supervise and I teach this, and I feel like a lot of therapists don't do enough work around this. So I have a lot of ways of getting there. And I'm also, pretty good at being diplomatic in the first session. Right. But for a good number of these clients that will do this to me in the first session, I will gently terminate with them and say something like, well, so I'm not hearing a firm goal that you want to work on, which is normal. That's okay. But what I want you to do is I want you to, after we conclude, I want you to go home, and I won't charge you for today if you don't continue with me. But I want you to go home and I want you to think about or talk about or journal about at least one thing that you want me to help you with, or just therapy in generally to change about you. And if you come up with that, then make an appointment and we'll talk. But if you can't come up with something, then I'm sorry, but I don't think it's worth your time to come here and have me try to coerce you to come up with a goal, So, give it a shot. And for some people, that's all they need. They just need like an hour of journaling and they'll figure it out. So if you come up with that, I'd love to work with you. Mm-hmm. But if not, then I think it's in your best interest to not come until you have that. Yeah. So they terminate, and they're not happy about it. It's weird. You would think they'd be like, oh, okay. In this state, they're already at odds. Right. You know what I mean?
And they're being rejected.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they don't leave the office happy.
No.
And I never see him again. Right. There's another approach. I could just sort of write it out and say like, okay, well, let's schedule for next week and continue talking about. And I will do that sometimes as well, for sure. For sure, there are some clients. But some clients, I just feel like if we're going to start out with you being antagonistic and basically accusing me of trying to pry things out of you, like there's already an accusation there of that, when I am not, right. then I don't personally want to do this.
You're not interested in that kind of case.
I'm interested if I predict that things can work out.
Yeah.
But if I predict, because, I think for some of these people, no matter what I do, they're going to blow out. So, maybe it's session 3 or session 7, but they're going to go because, for the clients that are really struggling in therapy, say someone with disorganized attachment, for example, they have a stated known wish for recovery or attachment or security or safety or, they know that, and we can all stand on that. And yet for some of these folks, there will be severe transference that will be occurring where they will hate me or think I'm rejecting them or be very hostile towards me. Mm-hmm. But we always have that, and the client has that thing to return to. They know that they deserve, or it would be helpful for them to recover from the relational trauma they've been through. For these clients, they don't have a conscious awareness of that.
No, they're highly defended.
Yeah. And so there's not a lot bringing them back. For the disorganized or the borderline client, they have a tremendous drive to return to the well and to come back to therapy.
Right.
Even though they are at times very suspicious that it is not only unhelpful, maybe a danger.
Right.
To people in this category with this schema and this personality disorder, they don't even have that.
Right.
They don't have a conscious drive.
Right.
The fact that they even ended up in therapy is kind of weird sometimes.
Yeah.
And often the circumstances are kind of weird, like their work forced them, or they had a suicide attempt that came out of nowhere seemingly to them or they went through a divorce, or their life truly is falling apart. They lost their job and their marriage and blah, blah, blah. And so unless there's something that I can point to say, I can work with this, then I don't predict it'll work well. And at a certain point in my career, I said,
you don't want to.
It's not what I wake up in the morning and decide I want to do,
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll get into it with someone with borderline who is attacking me and being hostile and threatening to sue me. I'll get my hands dirty and I'll get into it. It won't be pleasant, but I'll do it. And I'll professionally be very satisfied with that. But this sort of problem, I guess I just don't really predict it would work no matter what I did.
No, right. Well,
and to be clear, I don't terminate with them. I'm telling them, when you come up with a goal, which is a pretty small ask, then we will work with each other forever. That's all I'm asking. It's like, when you find a goal, then please make an appointment and we will work together.
Well, it's an invitation to engage with something below defense. And someone with really strong defenses is not going to take you up on it. I think it's good feedback, and that person probably going to have a response inside that's based in the defense, and the defense is somewhat hostile and offloading responsibility and putting it on the other. So, if I'm doing that, I'm not helpable.
Right.
Unless there's some part of me that's willing to say, oh yeah, I'm doing that, which is unlikely.
Yeah.
But if there were, then you got something to work with.
Well, the thing I guess I would say is that they're not likely to have that awareness.
No.
But a part of them could at least say, well, I can come up with something. How about self-esteem, or I'd like to not be as anxious, or I want my marriage to go a little better.
Yeah.
Something. It's not hard to have something, even if it's not even the thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
and if there's nothing, or then it's because the defense is trumping. But if I don't know that I'm defended,
yeah,
you don't think that's true?
I'm really twisting myself in knots because I'm bumping up against my policy with always saying that people come to therapy with problems. Like someone comes into therapy with narcissistic personality disorder, and a lot of times therapists will reject them because they're pathologically independent and will keep the therapist at arm's length. And although they might have a goal, unlike the other schema I was talking about, they, especially in the beginning of therapy, will do everything in their power to keep the therapist powerless. Mm-hmm. and keep the therapist in a position of observer and hopeful admirer of the client.
Oh, sure.
And for many therapists, it can be very challenging. And if the therapist were to confront the client like this, it would result in a similar outcome. And I would denigrate that therapist for not realizing what's going on and for rejecting a client when they obviously need your help. And you don't need every client to stroke your ego about everything. You know?
Of course. That's on the one hand.
Yeah. So so it makes me wonder if I just have to raise the question as to whether or not the handful of clients I can think about over the last 15 years that I've done this to, if I was actually going against my policy. I mean, it certainly is challenging because even with the narcissistic people, they often will have something to say about a goal. Say, well, I just want to explore myself or something.
Well, you're the doctor you tell me is a very interesting response.
Yeah.
It's full of thorns.
Yeah.
And
but people come to therapy with problems.
No, I get all that. Well, you might run into that problem of task alliance.
Yeah, well, we're already we can't even get to task alliance because we don't have a goal alliance.
Well, is it ethical to try to treat somebody who fights treatment?
I think that clients come to therapy because they have problems, and if it's obvious that the client's problems are resulting in them having a hard time tolerating a conversation about them offering up a goal, which is self-critical or asking for help or any kind of self-reflection, is obviously a result of something they went through. It's not normal to have that kind of reaction, right?
Right. I mean, somebody being that defended, it's not hard to pick out.
Right. Like, for example, it's normal for a client to come to me and say, I want you to help me to, quit alcohol or something.
Sure.
And for me to say, oh, well, I could help you with that, but there's a better treatment professional. It's normal for a client to not know what a therapist does or what it's for.
Right.
But that's normal, but it's not normal for a client to show up to therapy and have such, I'm saying it just is an obvious symptom of something.
Yeah, it is.
And so I don't like, I have no justification for what I did other than I was just annoyed, which I hate it when other therapists do that.
Well, you don't like working with this kind of person?
I don't mind working with these people, actually. I with many of the clients that have these kinds of schemas, I have worked with them. It's a struggle, but it's not as hard as other kind of personality disorders.
Well, it is interesting because there's something about it that you notice that you really turn off and wish to close the door.
Yeah.
You won't be an overt dick about it, but you send a message that sends someone packing.
Yeah.
And you're not. It's at odds with your ethical
and moral.
Yeah.
If I was to think about it, going back to that house that I renovated, which isn't far from your current house.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
When I was working there, I remember there was a client. This would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20.
And she came in, and when you're a full-time private practice therapist, you have a fair amount of new clients in a month, and just another routine one of those. And she came in, and I had a session that was very similar to the one I kind of role played earlier. And she was the one that said, well, you're the doctor, you tell me.
Right.
And it had a vibe of, and this could be by countertransference, I'm sure that's part of it. So I don't know if this was a recreation on her part, a projective identification on her part.
Right.
And or an issue with me or just a complete issue with me. But the way it felt in those escalating moments was as if I was walking up to her in a dance club and hitting on her. And she was annoyed with it.
That's interesting.
That's the way it felt to me.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so that's why I think it's kind of relevant to the way that she was presenting physically, because it could be a whole syndrome of hers.
It's sort of a push-pull.
Yeah. Histrionics specifically. And a lot of pain and a lot of fear of closeness, a desperation for closeness, of course, and a need for attention, whether it's positive or negative, maybe for some sexual attention. Right? And I remembered feeling really insulted by the whole vibe, you know, and thinking, look, you came to me, and I am a competent therapist. I'm a professor. I'm a supervisor. So I'm not going to beg you to come up with something, you know, that kind of anger that I would have.
Fascinating.
And so I think that affected like maybe 1, 2, or 3 clients after that.
Oh, sure.
That presented similarly.
Similarly, you would have a similar response.
And I had this policy after that one from 20 years ago of just like, you know, because my policy is if clients don't have a goal, I don't reject them.
Yeah.
I have a whole system around that. But if they can't come up with a goal with that kind of vibe that she had, that histrionic vibe, then I felt very safe or vindicated or justified in being very nice and diplomatic and saying what I said. I'm just like, well, you know, feel free to come up with a goal and I'm your therapist. But until then, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what to assess. I don't know what to work on unless there's something that you want to change. With that one from 20 years ago, I terminated the session maybe like 17 minutes in. It was very brief, and she was angry about it.
Yeah.
She wanted to stay. And I'm like, unless there's something to work on, you know, therapy is a service that is professionally provided for people that want to change something. It's not just this amorphous activity, you know.
Right.
There's at least something to work on, something that you want me to help you with. Otherwise, I don't know what else to do.
I think you got caught up in a projection, like a really powerful one.
Yeah, she wanted me to feel invasive of her. She wanted me to feel like I was below her. She wanted me to feel as if I were begging her for something, you know? It had that kind of vibe to it where I was left in this crumbling mass saying, please, Venus from on high, give me something, you know? And I was hurt by that, I guess. Also kind of scared of it too. It's because it's like,
yeah,
what's happening right now, you know?
Right. You're in a play and there's lines and nobody handed you a script.
That's a good way to put it. It felt that way. It felt like, wait, what's happening right now? You're the doc. So this is 15 minutes into our first session. And again, I'm super diplomatic.
Sure.
You're the doctor. You tell me.
It's off the bat,
what is happening? How are you already angry at me?
Yeah.
How did this? I'm just asking for a goal. Everyone has, and some people it takes them a bit of time to figure out the goal. That's okay, but what's happening? So I think, you know, I don't know. I don't feel great about not examining this 20 years ago.
And I don't think you feel great about the fact that you don't want to, that this is someone you don't want to work with.
I don't feel great about not wanting to work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you said. You're right. No, I do want to work with them. And I have worked with plenty of histrionic people.
Yeah, but
But those people, which is the majority, I would say 95% of the histrionic people do have a goal that they can identify. It's just a particular kind of brand of histrionic.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have any moral or ethical problem with you not wanting to work with somebody.
I do.
You think you should want to work with everybody?
I think it's immoral for me to reject a client for having issues,
I see
even
your point.
when they interfere with coming up with a goal. Similar to, I think it's immoral for me to reject a client for saying something like, I think you're a worthless therapist, you know? It's
Yeah.
not uncommon for a narcissistic or
Yeah.
a histrionic or a borderline client
Agreed.
a year and a half in to say, they sit down on the couch and they're just like, I've been thinking about it and I can't think of a single thing that you've helped me with. You haven't helped. You haven't given me tools. All you've done is just avoid and create all these boundaries about
Sure.
things. And I just don't understand how you and all your type are in business. This is just a complete sham. I hear that, I hear that on the reg. I don't turn to that client and say, well, you can get the fuck out of my office.
No, of course not. No, because they're handing you something to work with.
Right.
They're
Similar to the histrionic person who said, you're the doctor, you tell me.
Right, I get it. She's also handing you something to work with. Now I remember, you might not be a good candidate for that kind of person. Like if 17 minutes in you want them to leave, it might be good if they do.
Maybe. But there's not a lot of therapists out there that, in my anecdotal experience,
I get
and
it.
maybe she would have gelled differently with a different therapist.
Maybe.
I can't know that, but I'm not reassured that if I were to just say, go find another therapist, that things would work out. I'm not reassured of that.
No, because
I'm not saying I'm special. I'm saying that they would run into the same issues, and it's more common for people to draw that boundary than
there's degrees of, expertise, and there's a lot of folks who do not have enough training to,
or the desire.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if she could hear you with the fight inside you. I wonder what the impact of that would be.
Yeah.
I could imagine 20 years later appreciating that she still takes up space and that you care.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That would have been the helpful thing to focus on.
Your response to it now might be different than it was 20 years ago, too.
Yeah, I don't know. This one is harder for me to know where I was with, because I wasn't very aware of histrionic as much as I was borderline back then.
Yeah.
So I don't, and I'm not even sure if the few people I'm thinking of had histrionic, but it was some sort of personality disorder. It's not just a random anxiety, It was some deep relational trauma that was being foisted very firmly, and weirdly and dangerous. It felt dangerous,
Yeah. Well, that's part of it, is you were scared.
Yeah, it feels very dangerous.
Yeah.
Feels like I am already in the process of slipping through the thin ice and drowning.
I could see why you would find a elegant way to
back away.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a scantily clad young woman in your home office and she's already angry at you, you know what I mean? And implying that somehow I'm trying to force her into therapy or something, it just feels so dangerous.
That's really interesting. She's being forced.
By me.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Not by her dad or I'm literally the one forcing her into therapy.
Right. But that's the projective identification. That's the view of self in the world. I mean, it's fine. It has nothing to do with you.
Right.
That one, she walked in the door with that one rattling around inside her.
Right.
And we don't even have the benefit of any kind of context, like she went because, the court ordered her to. Not that one, you'd know that. But, because a spouse pushed her into it, or who knows what.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, live and learn, Bob.
Yeah.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.